Welcome to another episode of Barman Saturdays, and this week I decided to take a look at Sky Dancers, Volume 1, Flights of Fancy, and we're going to be talking about Episode 5, Lonely Hearts. You might be asking, why are we starting with Episode 5? Like, it's Volume 1, right? Don't you have Episode 1? No. Despite being labeled Volume 1, this has episodes 5, 7, 10, and 11 if you go by the fan site. And if you go by Wikipedia, it has episodes 5, 9, 8, and 10. You might be asking yourself, why would you say 9, 8, and 10? Well, that's the order they show them in, so that's how I wrote them down when I listed the episodes out. So, yeah, it's weird. I don't know why they did that. Apparently there is a DVD with, like, the first 12 episodes on it, or at least it comes with 12 episodes, and I would assume it's the first 12 episodes, so basically the first half of the show, because there's only 26 episodes. So I guess they couldn't fit a 13th episode on there, and there's supposedly a missing 27th episode that no one really knows where it goes in the sequence. I guess people aren't sure if it was meant to be like the first episode of the second season, and they managed to, like, I guess, get it recorded, and then found out like, oh, we're being canceled, so that episode was just never shown, but might be on some VHS tapes or DVDs out there somewhere. Um, as a lost bonus episode, I guess. It's weird. Apparently, this series found the same fate as Trolls, where certain episodes, were put together, in odd sequences and just, spat out into the market. As movies with Trolls, at least there were 3 episodes, I guess, usually in order. But with Sky Dancers, it's all over the place with the episodes. You get basically the most random assortment of episodes because it's so episodic as a series. It doesn't really matter what episodes you watch in what sequence, as long as you watch the first episode first. It's the only one I assume that matters because I would assume it explains, how the Sky Dancers got their powers. So yeah, it's the only one that has any real, stuff that moves over from the rest of the episodes. Kind of hate when series do that. I kind of prefer when series have, an ongoing storyline because it allows for more build up and story arcs. And with some of the stuff they try to talk about in this show, it would have been a good idea. But before we get on to talking about, specific issues with Lonely Hearts, I figured I would talk about general complaints I have about for all the episodes, so I don't have to cover them every time I talk about, the remaining episodes. In some instances, there's a lack of lip animations.
So I can lay waste to the wingdom!
This doesn't pop up in every episode that I noticed, but when it does pop up, you're definitely going to catch it because it stands out as a very, very big animation error. I mean, there are definitely ways to hide that, like have them use their hand to cover up their face, or read a book, or, turn away from the camera, or at least where the camera should be at from the audience's perspective. Like, there are ways to hide, that kind of laziness. If you don't want to animate their lips, like, don't have them prominently on screen. Because it really stands out and is really irritating to see. Another thing you might notice if you're paying attention during the opening sequence is that some of the characters are off-model. And if you're wondering, like, how could they make that mistake? Isn't the opening sequence usually have the best animation in these old 90s and like 80s cartoons? Although this is one from the late 90s. And yeah, she'd be right, this probably does have some of the best animation sequences in the entire series. Although a lot of it just seems to be sequences, lifted from the show itself, but some of it's original. But apparently these off-model character designs are based on the concept art, and for some reason they used it for some animation sequences in the opening. Not entirely sure why, but at least there's an explanation for why the characters are off-model. They're based on the first models they set up and decide, they'd make some changes to later. Probably to make them easier to draw in the grand scheme of things, I would assume in most cases. Because let's face it, this is a very low-budget animation effort, so you definitely don't want anything too complicated, or it's going to be even more jarring just how low-budget your show is. Another thing you'll notice about this show if you watch it yourself is they just reuse the opening song constantly. It's constantly playing in the background, and it's recycled even as the end credits song. So you're going to get heard a lot. So you best get used to it, or really, really like it, or you're going to be especially pissed off at this show at some point. You're like, can you please play a different song? I mean, they do use some classical songs here and there, but they really love playing that opening song. I guess they wanted to get their money's worth for it. It's like, we got to squeeze out every last penny we spent on this. Another thing you know is they'll reuse animation sequences. And I mean, not just transformation sequences or them flying into the wing dome, as they like to call it. Like, they'll reuse animation sequences, within like 30 seconds of each other. And it's not even necessarily fight animation they're reusing. Like if they're doing that like Dragon Ball Z does, I could overlook it a bit. But considering, the characters don't have super speed, it doesn't make as much sense why they'd be, repeating sequences in a fight as much, to be honest. So even then I might have been a bit iffy on it. But yeah, you'll definitely notice some reused animation, and it's just not spread that far apart from each other. It feels really lazy. Another thing you'll notice if you're paying attention is there's very limited wing animation. Oftentimes, characters don't move their wings at all while they're flying, which gets under my skin sometimes, because, like, man, this is so low effort. Can you just please include some wing animation? Like, even some simple wing animation. I know it costs money, but please. Otherwise, the characters might as well not even have wings and just be allowed to fly, regardless, like they're Superman. And yes, I realized the whole spinning wing thing was part of the toy, so they had to put them in there, but, like, geez, animate them, please!
You gotta really flap them hard! Maybe not quite that hard.
Another thing you'll notice about this show if you watch it yourself is there's a lot of dated slang. This show really dates itself to the late 90s, with all the terms they throw out, like fat and stuff like that. I really don't know why they went with some of the slang they did, because it only serves to date shows. If you can help it, do not use slang in your series. Like, if you aren't doing a period piece, don't use it. It's easier to make your piece feel, more timeless if you don't have, slang terms that date it to a certain period. Plus, it makes those watching it feel even older. It's like, oh, I remember when that term was, the big thing to say at times. And they also make some dated references to various, like TV shows or movies as well. So that doesn't help either. But I suppose to end on a more positive note, they do have a diverse cast in this series. So at least, the characters all have a setup for different backgrounds. Though if they actually really made use of that or not, I'm not entirely sure, because the 4 episodes I have, don't really give me enough information to say definitively that they do or don't. And I don't feel like watching any of the other episodes to figure this out. As for Lonely Hearts itself, it starts out with Skyla being really mean to some of her students, because, it's coming up on the anniversary of the apparent death of her husband. So she's in a rather foul mood. Can't entirely blame her, because, anniversaries like that definitely suck and, sour the mood quite a bit if you're actually emotionally invested in, people, unlike me usually. So I can be thankful I have the emotional depth of a teaspoon sometimes. Probably even shallower than that, so I don't, get choked up on anniversaries that much usually. As for why this matters, I have no idea. Outside of setting up why Queen Skyla's in a bad mood, it doesn't really matter to anything else going on. Sure, the villain, comments on it, and how it's a good time then to carry out an evil plan, but he's gonna attack the kingdom, regardless whenever he feels like it anyway. So it being, the anniversary of his brother's death only makes it seem maybe a little more insulting. They can't even mourn the death of his own brother, but let's face it, the villain hated his brother because he got the crown, and it's his younger brother, so it should have been his by right of birth, right? Apparently their father passed him up because, even he could tell he was evil and would abuse the power of the magic stone at the heart of the story, because you gotta have a magical, bauble in there somewhere that grants the power of flight. So yeah, like, he threw a fit and set off an invasion. But for this episode, he sent someone to steal the queen's glove, because she had the magic bauble attached to her glove after the death of her husband. Or I should say apparent death. We'll get into that more when we talk about episode 11. So after she gets kidnapped and the glove is stolen, we get to watch, the Skydancers head to the Netherworld in order to save her, because apparently you can just easily fly to the Nether Realm. I guess there's not much of a barrier between the two realms, because the villain does it too. Like, he'll just casually just fly to the Wingdom and launch an attack if he feels like it. So apparently being banished to the Netherworld doesn't really stop you from, attacking the Wingdom. It makes the King's sacrifice so worth it, right? But, at any rate, the evil villain takes away their power of flight because he uses the power of the magic bauble they stole. Eventually they get it back, and, happy ending, right? And the queen talks about how she won't be lonely anymore because she realizes she has good friends with her students, being there for her. Even though it was King Skylar that stepped in and saved her, because apparently ghosts can reflect magic spells, or at least we think he's a ghost at this point in time in the story. Because, like I said, they do reveal that's not actually true in episode 11, and I'll explain what they say about him there when we get to it. But yeah, it's weird.